the rise of the English East India Company. In search for sea routes to the east, the British, the French, the Dutch, and the Portuguese became the rivals of each other. In this struggle for power, Britain emerged victorious and became an imperialist nation that ruled India for nearly 200 years. The English East India Company was formed in 1600 with a charter from Queen Elizabeth I, granting it the sole right to carry trade in the East. This meant that no other trading group in England could compete with the East India Company. The English established their settlements and factories at Masulipatam, Patna, Dhaka in Bengal, Fort St. George in Madras, Bombay, and Sultanati, Kalikata, and Govindpur. Kalikata and Govindpur were joined together to form a new city, Calcutta, now known as Kolkata. The factory at Sultanati was also fortified and renamed as Fort William. In 1691, the English were granted a farman by the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, which exempted the British Company from paying custom duties in Bengal. In 1770, another Mughal emperor, Farrukhsiyar, granted another farman. This farman extended the privilege to the British to Gujarat and Deccan. But before the East India Company could establish itself in India, the Portuguese had already conquered Goa and started expanding their commercial and political power in the western coast of India. The Dutch too had started establishing their trading factories. The Europeans, Indian spices, silk, textile, indigo, and saltpeter for making gunpowder were very much in demand in Europe. During the medieval period, Arab traders controlled this trade through the sea route. But when a conflict or war started between the Turks and the Europeans, this trade was disrupted. In order to get the Indian goods, which were much in demand in Europe, the Western traders decided to find new sea routes to India. The first European traders to discover a new sea route to India were the Portuguese. They were followed by the Dutch, the English, and finally the French. All of them formed trading companies. Their primary aim was to capture the profit-raising markets of Asia. The European powers in India. The Portuguese. Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese sailor, first discovered a sea route to India via the Cape of Good Hope in 1498 and arrived at Calicut, Kerala. So, the Portuguese were the first to establish political power in India along the west coast. They conquered Goa and made it the center of their commercial and political power in India, which they controlled for nearly 4.5 centuries. The Dutch. The Dutch were the next to reach India in 1595. And the Dutch East India Company was formed in 1600 AD. The Dutch started controlling the spice trade in Indonesia. Later, their chief trading center shifted to Nagapatnam. The Dutch also started establishing trading factories in Masulipatam, Calicut, and Surat. However, the Dutch dominance collapsed with their defeat at the hands of the British. The French. The French too tried to enter the competition for trade in India. They set up their factories in Pondicherry, Puducherry, Madras, Chennai, and Chandernagore in Bengal. The French had to confront and compete with the British. This resulted in the Carnatic Wars, in which the French were finally defeated. All these European trading companies competed with each other to buy fine cotton and silk produced in India. Spices like pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and cardamoms were also demanded by them. All these items had a big market in Europe. Naturally, these rival European companies wanted to push their competitors out and capture the entire Indian market. This cutthroat competition led to fierce battles between all the trading companies. The Anglo-French struggle. By the 18th century, the British and the French got established as the two major Western powers in India. The Portuguese had lost their monopoly over Indian trade. The Dutch too had been defeated and had turned towards spice trade in the Indonesian islands. For nearly 20 years, from 1744 to 1763, the French and the English fought for the control of the trade and territories of India. Taking advantage of the decline of the Mughal Empire and the political instability in South India, the French and the British fought 3 wars to control the trade. These wars are called the Carnatic Wars. First Carnatic War, 1746 to 1748. In 1742, a war broke out in Europe between France and England. The war also spread to India, where the British and the French companies clashed with each other. When the war ended in Europe in 1748, it ended in India too. Results. Number 1. Neither side made any territorial gains, but the rivalry between the two powers over trade and territory continued. Number 2. The war exposed the weakness of the rulers of South India. The Nawab of Carnatic had failed to stop a war in his own territory. Number 3.
Dupleix, the governor of the French company, was very capable and far-sighted.
He decided to take full advantage of the unstable political condition of South India and increase French political influence in the south. Second Carnatic War, 1749 to 1754. In 1748, when rulers of both Carnatic and Hyderabad died, Dupleix decided to intervene in the wars of succession that had started both in Carnatic and Hyderabad and set up puppet rulers in these two states who would serve the interests of the French. Naturally, the British too had their ambitions and would not allow the French to get an upper hand. They also wanted to set up their puppet rulers in these states.
Under the able leadership of Robert Clive,
a young clerk in the British East India Company, the British managed to defeat the French finally and made Muhammad Ali, the Nawab of Carnatic, their nominee. Results. The French government accepted defeat and signed a peace treaty. They also accepted the British demand that Dupleix must be sent back to France. This was a big blow to the future of the French company in India. The Second Carnatic War boosted the prestige of the British and led to the establishment of British control over Carnatic. Third Carnatic War, 1757 to 1763. The temporary peace between the British and the French companies ended in India when another war broke out between them in Europe. At the very beginning of this war, the English managed to gain control over Bengal after the victory in the Battle of
Plassey,
1757. Now, the British could use the rich resources of Bengal to overpower the French. The French, on the other hand, were handicapped due to constant shortage of funds. Finally, the French were defeated in 1760. The war in India ended with the end of the war in Europe in 1763. Results. The Third Carnatic War shattered French dreams of building their empire in India. Pondicherry and other French settlements were returned to the French, but they could not build forts or station troops in these territories. They could serve only as centers of trade and had to live in India under the protection of the British. The English now established their political influence over Carnatic. Freed of all European rivals, they could now get set for the task of conquering India. Reasons for the success of the British.
British naval supremacy. Due to their supremacy over the seas, the British ensured an uninterrupted supply of arms and resources from England.
Moreover, their supplies landed directly at their naval base in Mumbai. Financial stability. The British company was financially much stronger than the French. The captivity of the rich and prosperous province of Bengal became an additional source of wealth for the British. Capable leadership.
The English were led by capable officers like Robert Clive.
Whereas the elimination of duplex became the prime cause of loss for the French. Freedom from government control and interference. The English East India Company had a trade monopoly and functioned independently. It was free from government control.
The French company, on the other hand, was dependent on the French government for loans and financial help.
The French government was corrupt and inefficient. The French company, being controlled by corrupted and an inefficient government, lost the war. During the struggle with the French, the English learned that there was no unity among the Indian rulers and they could easily take advantage of their mutual quarrels to increase their power. So, with the help of the rich resources of India, the English East India Company started planning to conquer India. The conquest of Bengal.
The Mughal Emperor Farrukhsiyar had permitted the British to trade in Bengal without paying any custom duty. This led to enormous loss of revenue for the Nawabs of Bengal.
The situation worsened because officials of the company started their private trade side by side without paying any custom duty. The Battle of Plassey, 1757. The clash between the British and the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, began when the Nawab, furious at the British for their gross misuse of power, attacked the English factory at Qasim Bazar, captured the company officials and blocked the English ships. Then, The Nawab marched to Calcutta and captured the company's fort, Fort William. On hearing the news of the fall of Calcutta,
company officials in Madras sent forces under the command of Robert Clive.
there was no option but a major war. The first open war between the British and the Nawab of Bengal took place at Plassey in 1757. In this battle, Siraj ud Daulah was defeated and killed. One of the major causes of this defeat was the treachery within the Nawab's army. Mir Jafar, one of the important commanders, had secretly joined hands with the British as they had promised to make him the Nawab after crushing Siraj ud Daulah. The Battle of Plassey was a turning point in Indian history and of immense historical importance as it paved the way for the British dominance over Bengal and eventually the whole of India. The British made major gains after this battle. Some of them are listed below.
Number 1.
The East India Company got free trading rights in Bengal.
Number 2.
The British got the zamindari of 24 parganas. They utilized the resources of Bengal to maintain a large and well-equipped army. The British also started draining the wealth from Bengal, but the company was still unwilling to take over the responsibility of Bengal's administration. They wanted Bengal to be ruled by a puppet Nawab whom they could control and manipulate. The English proclaimed
Mir Jafar
as the Nawab of Bengal. The new Nawab Mir Jafar paid a huge sum of money to the British company as compensation for the attack on Calcutta. In addition, he paid large sums as gifts and bribes to the officers of the company. Thus, the Battle of
Plassey
increased the British prestige and power. The rich revenues of Bengal enabled them to organize a strong army. Mir Jafar, a puppet ruler. After the Battle of
Plassey,
the British made
Mir Jafar
to sit on the throne of Bengal. But the puppet Nawab could not meet the never-ending demands of the company's officials for presents and bribes. Battle of Buxar, 1764. When Mir Jafar could not meet the ever-growing demands of the company, he was deposed and replaced by Mir Kazim as the Nawab of Bengal. But Mir Kazim refused to be a puppet ruler. He tried to improve the administration of Bengal and its army. He trained his soldiers on the lines of the European army. He also tried to stop the corrupt trade practices of the company officials. As a result, he was overthrown and turned out of Bengal and Bihar. In the Battle of Buxar, fought between the British and Mir Kazim, the latter formed an alliance with the Nawab of Awadh, Shuja ud Daulah, and the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. Their combined army met the British forces at the Battle of Buxar in 1764, where the English defeated them. Thus, while in Plassey, the British defeated a young and inexperienced Nawab, and that too through treachery, in Buxar, the British defeated three powerful and battle-hard rulers. After this battle, the powerful Nawab of Awadh was left at the mercy of the British. The Mughal Emperor became a prisoner of the British. From the Nawab of Bengal, the British got the right of Diwani, or the right to collect the land revenue of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. Thus, a dual government was established in Bengal where the British collected land revenue but the internal administration of maintaining law and order and defense of the state remained with the Nawab. Thus, the Nawab had a lot of responsibilities while the financial power was with the British. Now, the rich revenues collected from the Bengal province could easily meet the expenses of the East India Company, especially in the matters of trade and maintenance of the troops, expansion of the company's rule in India.
The British supremacy was established mainly by two methods.
Direct and indirect annexation. Conquest of Mysore, Punjab, and Sindh was the example of direct annexation. The British also subdued Marathas through wars. On the other hand, subsidiary alliance and doctrine of lapse are the examples of indirect annexation. The conquest of Mysore. The South Indian state of Mysore had become strong under the leadership of Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan. Tipu Sultan took up arms with the British when he stopped the export of pepper and cardamom through his ports and stopped permitting the local merchants from trading with the company. He also started modernizing his army with the help of the French. The British wanted to crush the ruler of Mysore who wanted to assert his independence. The British fought 4 wars with Mysore in 1767 to 69, 1780 to 84, 1790 to 92, and in 1799 respectively. In the first 2 wars, neither side won, but in the third Anglo-Mysore War, fought between Tipu Sultan and British, Tipu Sultan was defeated. Tipu had to sign the Treaty of Seringapatam, named after his capital. He had to give away half of his kingdom and hand over 2 of his sons as hostages to the British. Finally, in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, Tipu was defeated and killed while defending his capital, Seringapatam. War with the Marathas. The British regarded the Maratha as their greatest rivals. The Marathas were divided into different states under different sardars or chiefs belonging to dynasties such as Scindias, Holkars,
Gaikwads,
and Bhonsles. These chiefs were united under the leadership of the Peshwa, who was the administrative and military head. The British could suppress the Marathas after 3 Anglo-Maratha wars. The main weakness of the Marathas was their political disunity. The British could defeat all the Marathas' chiefs. Their territories were reduced to small sizes. They were compelled to sign subsidiary alliance with the British and became their dependent allies. The defeat of the Marathas made the English the supreme power in India. The British also conquered Sindh to suppress possible Russian influence over India. The British feared that Russia might try to enter India from the northwest. In order to secure control over the northwest, the British fought a prolonged war with Afghanistan and established an indirect rule there. The British also took over Sindh in an indirect and treacherous way. First,
they signed a trade agreement with the rulers of Sindh who were known as Amirs.
Then they prompted the Amirs to sign a subsidiary treaty with the British, and finally, irrespective of their previous assurance of regarding the freedom of sin, it was taken over by the British in 1843. Punjab was the last independent state to be annexed. Under Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Punjab had become a strong and powerful state with a strong and disciplined army. But after the death of Maharaja Ranjit,
there was chaos in Punjab, which was annexed by the British after two battles.
the First Anglo-Sikh War began in 1845. Though the Punjab army fought bravely, some of the leaders turned traitors. It was forced to sign the humiliating Treaty of Lahore on 8th March 1846. The British annexed a large part of Punjab. The strength of the Punjab army was reduced and a strong British force was stationed at Lahore. Now, the British wanted to impose direct rule over Punjab. The freedom-loving people of Punjab rose in revolt, but their revolts were crushed by the British. Lord Dalhousie grabbed this opportunity to conquer Punjab in 1848. Thus, the last independent state of India was finally taken over by the British. The subsidiary alliance, an indirect method of annexation. The subsidiary alliance was devised by Governor General Lord Wellesley. It was a very clever method developed by the British to expand British territory indirectly. Under this system, the British promised to protect the Indian states by stationing their army in the ruler's territory. In return, the Indian states had to make payment for their upkeep. If the Indian rulers failed to make the payment, the part of their territory was taken away as penalty. A British official called resident was also placed at the court of the ruler. The resident was supposed to advise the ruler, but in reality, he interfered and dominated the ruler. The Indian rulers also could not maintain any relation with any of the rulers without the permission of the British. Thus, the Indian rulers lost their right to independent decision making, and their military powers also rested in the hands of the British. The British had gathered for themselves influence and power that allowed them to maintain large forces at the expense of the Indian rulers and to take over the Indian states anytime they wanted. The doctrine of lapse. Under Lord Dalhousie, who was the Governor General from 1848 to 1856, a new scheme for indirect annexation was devised. This policy was known as the doctrine of lapse. According to the doctrine, if an Indian ruler died without a male heir, his kingdom would lapse and it would be taken over by the East India Company with immediate effect. The right of adoption was denied to the Indian rulers. In 1856, Dalhousie also took over the kingdom of Awadh on the plea that it was being misgoverned. Thus, taking advantage of the political disunity among the Indian rulers, the East India Company transformed itself from a trading company into a strong colonial power. Administrative policy of the East India Company. The British administration in India was based on three pillars: civil services, army, and police. Civil services. Lord Cornwallis established the Indian civil services because only well-trained civil servants could take up the challenge of governing the Indian territories. Lord Cornwallis tried to make the Indian civil services honest and efficient by increasing the salary of the officers and by fixing the rule that promotion would be on the basis of seniority. The officers were not allowed to accept presents and bribes. Till 1853, all appointments to the civil services were made by the directors of the East India Company. But after 1853, all the civil servants were recruited through a competitive examination. A special feature of the Indian civil services was that Indians were almost completely excluded from it. All high posts in the administration were held by Englishmen. The British did not trust that the Indians would follow British policies in India. Indians were, however, appointed in large numbers to subordinate posts at the lower salary since they were much more readily available as compared to the Englishmen. Army. The second important pillar of the British government in India was the army. With the help of the army, the British defeated the Indian rulers, defended the British Empire from their foreign rivals, suppressed the internal revolts and extended the British Empire in Asia and Africa. The major part of the East India Company's army consisted of Indian soldiers. However, the officers of the army were exclusively British. In fact, no Indian soldier could rise above the rank of a subedar. Police. The third pillar of the British rule was the police, formed by Lord Cornwallis. He introduced a system in which a district was divided into a number of thanas, each under a daroga whose responsibility was to maintain peace and order in his area. The district superintendent of police was the head of the police organization in a district. In the police service also, Indians were excluded from all superior posts. Apart from trying to end crimes like dacoity, the police was also responsible for suppressing the rise of any nationalist movement. Judicial organization. The British decided to dispense justice through a number of civil and criminal courts in 1865. The high courts were established at Calcutta, Madras and Bombay. In India, the British introduced the modern concept of the rule of law. This meant that their administration was carried out according to the laws which defined the rights and duties of the people and not according to the whims and fancies of the British authorities. The British also introduced the concept of equality before law. This means that all the people are equal before the law irrespective of their caste, religion, class, language and gender. But equality before law was not always practiced. The Europeans had separate courts and even laws. In criminal cases, they could be tried only by European judges. Moreover, justice became expensive due to the court fees, lawyers' fees, and expenses of witnesses. Courts were often situated in distant towns. Cases dragged on for years. The complicated laws were beyond the grasp of the ignorant and illiterate peasants. The rich could turn and twist the law in their favor. Thus, justice became costlier and involved long delays in the settlement of court cases. Now, the East India Company transformed itself into a territorial power.